Good evening. Welcome to the study session of the Albion City Council, Monday, June 25th, 2018. I call this meeting to order and ask Clerk Domingo to call the roll.
Councilmember Barnes.
Here.
Reed.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Lawler. Spicer.
Here.
French. And Mayor Brown.
Here, are there any public comments this evening? Persons addressing the council, we ask that you limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes and observe proper decorum. Comments on the agenda this evening. Seeing none, we'll move on to items for individual discussion. Item A, council rules and procedures with Attorney Scott Smith. And we're just going to get started. So this is, we're being recorded, but it's still informal. And what we wanted to do, you came in January to discuss the rights, roles, responsibilities of the officers of the city. And that is a good segue into our rules. And so we had a committee, 3 council members, myself, the Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember French, that basically took the Port Huron rules, modified them. What we're looking to do is to make sure that we can kind of tighten them up and then also maybe include some of what we attached as an appendix, which is the document you created, to maybe integrate that into the rules, like a section. So, for example, we have a section on authority. Maybe we have a new section 2 of rights, roles, responsibilities. So that councils that come after us have a sense of what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay.
So I don't know if we want to go through piece by piece, or because one of the other issues that came up for us is the idea was not to, for example, spring something on the administration at the last minute. So we had put language in there about when agenda items would have to be submitted to be put on the agenda. But then what we later came back and realized is, wait a minute, the charter says that the agenda can be modified up until noon the day of the meeting. So that kind of clashes. So, and then also discussions that have been had about decorum and kind of making that better with how the meetings flow. So that's kind of all tied together.
So I've read through the draft of the rules you have, and I can comment on those, but you all have probably read through that draft too and may have some comments or questions. So I don't care how we proceed.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever works best for you. I'm here to facilitate.
Okay.
You're getting rules that you all want,
Okay.
not to tell you what you ought to have.
Okay. So I guess we can go through it briefly. I don't think we need to read every line, but just
No.
we can just. So the one question, this is a holdover from. So basically, we start by saying this is the authority we have to create these rules, and the charter allows that. The question I have is, we have some kind of definitions there in section, I guess 1D. Does that need to be there, or does that?
Well, definitions are helpful. For the most part, what you've done is repeated a number of definitions that are already in state law. So you're basically defining meeting, you're defining decision, just parroting the language in the Open Meetings Act. That's okay.
Okay.
But it probably isn't necessary. There is one definition I had a question about, and that was the definition of unanimous. Usually, a unanimous vote would refer to the votes of all the members present, not all the members of the council.
Okay.
And so you might have a unanimous vote if you only had 6 members at a meeting, by having 6 of the members vote in favor.
Okay. The other question, I had was, let's see, give me 1 second. Okay, regarding meetings, and maybe we can, I don't know, we're gonna talk about that later when we get to meetings. So right now, we're in a study session. It's a
Right.
meeting of the council. Normally, we do not take action at study sessions. Is there, are we constrained when we say a study session? Is there anything we're doing? You know, we have, the de facto practice, I'll say it that way, has been to not vote or do things like that. But from your experience, is there actually like a legal difference between
Well, it has to do with what you're telling the public and one another when you notice the meeting. So whether you call it a study session, many communities call them work sessions.
Okay.
And they're generally where you may be trying to drive towards some consensus on an issue, but you're not taking a formal vote. So, for instance, I've worked with a number of communities lately in medical marijuana ordinances, and they're going through various policies and may poll the council. What do you think about this? Should this be in the draft? Shouldn't it be in the draft? You're getting some informal consensus, but not taking a vote. It'll still come up for a first reading and second reading in the normal course of things. So I would, in fact, I had marked that here, that you need to clarify that provision on the study sessions, because it could be interpreted to indicate that you're going to take, or could take a vote on some things, and I wasn't understanding that to be your desire. I had another comment on page 2 on Rule 1F. Oftentimes, those meetings between the mayor and the manager include one or more other council members. Mount Pleasant does it with the mayor pro tem. Other communities will do it on a rotating basis, so they'll rotate another council member through. Some will do it on another basis. It just tends to broaden support and also helps the manager understand what varying council perspectives might be. So you might think about that. I'm not.
So one of the things, let's see. This is a more kind of formalized, because like, for example, at the end of F where it says dates and times are set along with regular council meetings. So, you know, at the beginning of, or let's say maybe the last meeting in December, or the second to last meeting in December, we pass a resolution for our regular meetings for the coming year. And this is kind of a suggestion that we do the same. And do you see that, or is there just a?
Yeah, generally those are set. A lot of communities will set it on the Wednesday before the council meeting, or a Wednesday following a council meeting, depending on how you want to do it, to begin shaping the next agenda, to determine what additional information is needed. So you can set it kind of how you think it ought to be. If you're meeting on the first and third Mondays, you might do something on the second and fourth Mondays. Whatever.
So the other question I had, under regular meetings, the notice times, I know there's some charter notice times. Are we exceeding the charter notice times?
What do you mean exceeding the charter?
So, if the charter says, okay, you have to post a notice a day before. Can we make a rule that says, well, we want to post, the rule is to post it 2 days before?
Sure. You just can't provide any less notice than the charter requires, or more particularly than the Open Meetings Act requires. So there are some charters that will say you can give notice of a special meeting 6 hours ahead of time. No, you can't, because the Open Meetings Act says 18 hours ahead of time.
One of the things we run into as well, I'm just throwing this out as we're going kind of free form, what happens in situations where I I can point to two situations that are kind of the same thing. One is there's a request from a resident to say, hey, you know, there's going to be an issue before the council that's going to command a lot of community attention. Can we change the venue? How, because that's set by resolution, you know, we say, hey, at the beginning of the year, we say we're going to meet first and third Mondays, 7 o'clock at City Hall. How do we change that, or how should that be handled, or how can that be handled without actually calling a meeting to change the venue?
Well, in a number of communities, they'll do it a number of different ways. So you can post on the website that
Okay.
due to an expected large crowd, you're gonna change the venue to some other place. Put that notice on the website, put that notice on the door of the meeting so that people know that you're meeting somewhere else. And do what you can to get word out about the change in the meeting place. Oftentimes, that'll happen toward the last minute because people will see. In fact, I've even had the meeting begin and people say, we're gonna recess and relocate to another place where we've got more room for people to attend.
Okay, Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. So prior to the meeting actually taking place, who
Makes that call.
normally has the authority to make that call, to change the venue?
Well, you can set that up in your rules any way you
Okay.
want to. In most communities, it's the city manager or city clerk will alert somebody, hey, we're expecting a big crowd. There was a flyer that went around over the weekend. We've had a number of calls from people asking about, you know, how soon we're gonna have to get here to get a seat. And maybe it's better if we just change the meeting location to the high school or to a local church or whatever you're gonna do.
Okay, because the thing, and like I said, it's small, but it kind of gets to the heart of what, so I think some of what's happened with us is so the council, like four council members at the least make the decision on policy, or, you know, set a meeting, like we've passed a resolution when and where we're gonna meet.
Right.
But I, as mayor, or someone as mayor pro tem, or 2 or 3 council members can't say, or even the manager can they say, okay, we're gonna change the location if council's already approved? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think you can establish in your rules a procedure for doing that.
Okay,
Whether it's consultation among the manager, the city clerk, the mayor, and 2 other council members, if you want to do it, as long as it's not a quorum making the decision, and then say, hey, we think that, you know, we're gonna have 100 people here, we don't have room for 100 people, or we're gonna have 200 people, whatever you think.
okay.
I was at a meeting in one village once where there were 450 people.
Okay.
It wasn't a fun meeting.
Okay. So, I guess from anywhere from rule 1 to 4, were there any other concerns that you saw?
Rule 3D,
3,
you
what?
refer to closed meetings and executive sessions. I think the Open Meetings Act refers to them as closed sessions.
Okay.
Executive sessions is often used in parlance, but you can't have an entirely closed meeting because you have to obviously, you know, open in an open session and then take a vote to go into a closed session and then come back out to adjourn your meeting at the very least.
Okay. Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm looking at the conduct of meeting, Rule 5, and the last sentence says, the chair may call upon the director, blah, 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 blah. If the officer is in attendance, should it be required that they are in attendance at every meeting for public safety reasons or personal reasons, or is that just standard language and the mayor uses his discretion?
Well, it depends on what your custom is. In a number of communities, the public safety director or chief of police attends all of the meetings, or somebody from the department does. In some cases, there's a designated officer that draws the short straw and has to attend the meetings. It just depends on how you do it. I think it's a good idea to have somebody in attendance, particularly if you anticipate that there's a matter about which people might have intense feelings and so forth. Sometimes that helps just calm people.
Okay.
Sometimes it doesn't.
So just to go back, so between Rule 1 and 4, those are the only
Yeah.
issues that you saw?
I have a number of comments on Rule 5, and I suspect that's where the bulk of the conversation is.
Yeah. So if there are no other, and so I guess the other question I just want to ask, let's go just back to 1, how it flows, you didn't see any issue with how that?
No.
Okay. So, on to 5. So I guess we can start with your,
I'd like to ask one.
Councilmember Reed.
Back in the front here, on page 2 of 15.
Okay.
Yeah. The mayor shall hold regular weekly meetings or conference call with the city manager to confer on city businesses and upcoming agendas. Do you all do that? Because I've called to try to find out things, and I've been told I can't get in touch with him.
Well, actually recently, and with the interim, we're actually kind of talking, we actually communicate very frequently. This was passed like right before the previous manager was there, so there was like maybe, that may have happened once or twice before the previous manager left.
Okay, so it's not weekly meetings?
It should be, and I guess that's because where this idea came from was in our session with Attorney Smith in January. He had mentioned that in other communities there is this kind of team huddle.
Right. And you can set that up any way you want to set it up. In some communities, it's on a weekly basis. In some communities, it's just before or right after a meeting. It's whatever works for you and the personalities involved. And I would suggest that whenever possible, it be a face-to-face, but sometimes that isn't possible because of work schedules and so forth. And then conference calls can work fine, scheduled calls. And in many communities, that involves more than just the mayor and the manager. In some cases, it might involve the manager and the clerk, or the manager and somebody else, depending on what's on the agenda to be discussed. If you're going to discuss an agenda item about snow plowing, you might have the DPW director participate in that conversation. And you may have more than the mayor participate on behalf of the council. Sometimes that's the mayor pro tem. Sometimes that's another council member. In some communities that rotates through. So this month it's, Councilmember Reed. Next month it's Councilmember Spicer and so forth joining in the conversation, however you want to do it. In some cases, council members may have particular subject matters they want to discuss. So if somebody feels particularly passionate about public safety or particularly passionate about economic development, and that's the topic of discussion, you may invite a council member who is particularly interested in that particular topic. So you can do that any way you want to do it. And it really should facilitate kind of an easy dialogue that's going on between the administration and the council, so neither's surprised. And so, you may learn what kind of trouble they're having gathering information or whatever.
Okay. And that's there's an agenda component to that too, but I'll wait till we get to the.
Yeah, there's an agenda component of that. Usually you're talking about what's coming up on the agenda, what you're seeing. You know, in many communities, they're scheduling work sessions sometimes 4 and 6 months out. This is what we're seeing for the next several months in work sessions. This is how we're choosing to prioritize them. You want them reprioritized so things get handled in a different order. How do you want to do that?
Okay. So we're back to 5, and I guess we'll start with your recommendations, and then we can kind of bring up, you know, concerns that council has had.
Well, a few observations. You know, I went back and looked at Robert's Rules of Order and looked under the provisions for the chair. And Robert's Rules did what I think the charter and these rules are trying to do. They make it clear that the chair really serves as the agent of the body. In other words, properly understood, the chair facilitates the body's orderly conduct of its business. The chair represents, according to Robert's Rules, this is almost a direct quote, represents the body, declaring the body's will and obeying the body's commands in all matters and regards. So the mayor is the presiding officer, is the servant of the council. The mayor's granted the authority as the presiding officer by the council and its rules, and serves the council pursuant to those rules. And thought of in that way, then that allows you to look at some of these other things. The arrangement of seating. I've seen councils come unglued over who's gonna sit where. And usually that's the prerogative of the chair to make some recommendations. And I've seen it done a variety of different ways. I've seen chairs say that seating should take into account any mobility, hearing, or other challenges that members have. So if somebody has difficulty hearing and needs to be in different places, sometimes seating's arranged to accomplish a variety of other differences. Sometimes I've seen mayors try to arrange and alternate people with political perspectives so that you don't have a bunch of people sharing the same perspective sitting on one side and those sharing another perspective on the other, alternating them and so forth.
So I have a question, it's an obscure question, but I'll ask because you're here. Before this council was seated, you know, I rearranged the seating, but we didn't vote on it. And so you're saying the chair is really kind of, is that something that should be voted on during sign die or signy die?
Oftentimes what happens is the mayor tries to get consensus of the council saying,
Okay.
you know, are you willing to sit with so-and-so? You're a more tenured member. This new council member could really benefit from your experience, or, you know, I wanna put you in eye contact with somebody else because you guys can tend sometimes to, well, I was on a board with somebody, and we had kind of a tendency to bridle in one or the other. You know, we were both pretty passionate and outspoken, and he would sometimes grab me by the arm and say, cool it, and sometimes vice versa.
Okay.
So you can, you know, there are just different ways of looking at it. So that's one thing on the seating, and I'd recommend you try to get consensus.
Okay.
And in some, on some bodies, they actually vote on it. The mayor makes a recommendation and there's a vote.
Okay.
Usually not. Usually it's kind of done by consensus.
Okay.
Privilege.
Okay. Continue, I'm sorry.
It says the city attorney is normally an advisor to the chair on any point of order and procedure under the rules. That seems to be a bit in conflict with subsection D of this rule.
Okay.
And, you know, I would suggest that the attorney indeed act as the advisor. The mayor or the chair would normally make the first call on the rules, but as you've noted, anybody can appeal the decision of the chair
Okay.
to the body in its entirety, so the mayor, although the mayor makes the initial call, hopefully that's with the attorney's input.
Okay.
Contrary to what your rules say, a procedural violation under the rules can affect the validity of the result.
Okay.
Because procedural rules do create due process expectations, and a violation of your rules in voting can be a due process violation if it's quasi judicial or other kind of proceeding that you're engaged in.
So
For
there-
instance, a planning commission action or a.
So because you said that, let's really quickly, if you jump back to 1C, that last sentence in 1C says, "The failure to strictly observe any such rule shall not
Right.
affect the," so that be taken out?
I would take that out.
Okay.
Is that on page 2?
Yes.
At the top.
Okay. So that should be taken out, and then the part where, let me see, where, the part where it says the attorney is not supposed to do that, that should probably be taken out, right?
Right.
Okay. Let me
I
find,
would allow the attorney all of the time. Now, the chair still makes the decision, but it's
Okay.
with the advice of the attorney.
okay. Councilman Brown, can you repeat where that was again?
Thank you, Mayor. That was my question.
Oh,
Where
okay.
was the,
Attorney,
I have to look at this again.
because in Rule 1F, it says that the attorney shall be present to
Right,
provide.
but the end of 5D says that the attorney shall not decide upon the interpretation of any rule of order or procedure. And then in 5B, it says, the city attorney normally shall be an advisor of the chair on any point of order, rule, or procedure. They aren't necessarily inconsistent, but they could be interpreted as being inconsistent. The attorney should advise, the chair makes the decision's always appealable to the entire body,
Okay. So
okay?
we probably can have some language to modify the, Councilman Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. So I want to make sure I'm following what you just said, okay? So, under Rule 5D with legal counsel, you raised concern about the interpretation of rule for the attorney, right?
Right.
And then you went to another rule,
5B,
B as in boy.
right. In the third sentence, it says, the city attorney shall be an advisor of the chair on any point of order or procedure under these rules.
Okay, I got it.
And those roles are consistent, because you want the attorney's advice. The chair makes the decision, as I said.
Okay.
And the decision's always, somebody could appeal the decision of the chair
Yeah.
to the body, and you've got a good procedure for doing that.
Okay.
I don't, Colin, did you have any other thoughts on that?
No.
Okay. Just looked like you might be puzzled, so I,
Well, it's been brung up before. Yeah. You wanna, Councilman Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. So, I'm sorry, I'm taking notes, and I want to make sure I'll remember this 2 days from now. So, under Rule 1, letter C, the very last sentence, you advised us to,
Strike.
strike that. Okay, wait, that's not what we're talking about. Where am I at? With the attorney, hold on. Oh, 5B, the way that is written is okay. What did you advise us to strike? I'm sorry.
I'm not saying we strike anything. I think we need to clarify
Okay.
that they aren't inconsistent. In fact, what you might do is just put a subsection someplace
Okay.
regarding the role of the city attorney, because you've got the city attorney's role
Yeah.
scattered in a number of different places, and the terminology and wording used isn't entirely
Yeah.
consistent.
And that's, and we can get to that, because I don't know if it's, we can keep going through it, but that's what I wanted to talk about too, is maybe, we have, 15, we have the rules in place, but maybe kind of wedge something in there between 1 and 2, create a new 2 for that roles, rights, responsibilities thing,
Right.
and do it that way. So let's continue through 5. Yeah.
You know, I was puzzled by something. He said, "No council member shall leave the seat or entertain private disclosure when a question's being put or the roll's being called." Is it ever appropriate for a council member during the course of a meeting to have a private discussion?
You're right.
Is it ever appropriate for the member to leave a seat other than an urgent matter of call of nature or whatever?
Yeah.
You know, there might be reasons why you have to do that, but you're sort of implying that it's appropriate at times to have private discussions.
So, and you have notes of these, right?
Yeah,
It's okay.
yeah, I've got it all
Color coordinate to you, okay.
written so that I just annotated it.
Okay. Councilor Brown, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. So 5C2, the section that you just referenced, the very last sentence, what are your thoughts on the very last sentence? When a council member is speaking, said council member should not be unduly interrupted.
Right, well, you know, what is undue interruption is the other question I have. Generally, a council member should be interrupted only for 3 things, right?
Point of order.
Yeah, point of order.
Point of order.
Point of order. What else did I write? To be called out of order if the chair recognizes it, or request to yield. Right? So generally, there are only 3 circumstances when a council member should be interrupted, and rather than having something in there like undue interruption, you just ought to say there are only 3 circumstances under which it's appropriate to interrupt a council member.
What was the
like-
third one?
Councilmember-
Asking the council member to yield. So if you wanted the council member to allow you to interject something, you could request that the member who's speaking yield.
Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you. And in the event that the admonishment to a council member is ignored to not interrupt, what steps, what actions, if any, have you found that councils have taken?
Well, there are a number of immediate steps that can be taken and a number of follow-up steps that can be taken. So immediate steps that can be taken are for the chair to call a recess. Just to say we're going to recess and allow us to regroup for a moment, and then somebody can counsel with the council member. Sometimes, if the chair's not being effective, another council member will step up and say, hey, you know, Councilmember Smith, you've been called out of order. It would be appropriate for you to stop speaking now. And sometimes that's effective, where if somebody's feeling intensely emotional about something, sometimes another member can be more persuasive than the chair.
And I think one of the things I'll throw in here, but I guess what I know it, but I'm realizing even more, is there's no one who can come outside of the council to enforce the rules. It's really, we have to enforce them among ourselves.
It should be self-enforced.
Yeah.
Now, there are times when, as the city attorney, I've spoken up and said something, because sometimes, just because I'm getting old and crotchety, somebody will listen to me when they might not listen to somebody else. But generally, that's not real effective, right? And it's difficult for most city staff to step into that breach, because the city staff that sit there serve at your pleasure. So the last thing they want to do is get between 2 council members in a discussion. So that's difficult to do. You can also, if the council member just refuses to yield, refuses to listen, it's possible to, if you haven't got a lot of other business, just adjourn the meeting and move on. Now, I've seen that done more effectively when at the end of the meeting, audience members get out of line. I think I related to you, there was a situation in Grand Rapids where a bunch of GVSU students came in and did a demonstration and started chanting and clapping, and they all laid down on the floor and refused to move, and Mayor Hartwell at the time said, "Meeting adjourned," because that was better than the prospect of being on camera, trying to regain control of the meeting or asking the police to come in and escort them out, right? And you can do the same thing with a council member. You can follow up with council members who who misbehave, with censure and other kinds of disciplining actions. I've seen council members stripped of committee assignments. I've seen them reassign their place on the dais. I've seen other kinds of things happen if they consistently fail to meet certain standards of appropriate meeting conduct. Because remember, this is a business meeting. It's a time for you to get the people's business done, and you can't have that meeting hijacked by a particular person, whether that person's a member of the body or a member of the public, right? That doesn't mean you want to cut them off and prevent them from speaking and prevent them from petitioning their government or prevent them from doing what they can, but you've got a limited time. It's not like the Senate where you can have a filibuster that can go on for days and days because you've got a few short hours to conduct a meeting.
Okay. You continue.
Okay,
Councilmember Reese.
thank you. So if you have someone who constantly walks out of meetings, who get upset and just cut up, you're saying you either, this group of us should censure that person, or should, no way you're gonna bring it to their attention and it be acceptable. So what do you do?
Well, so
If this happens
If-
4 times in once, like,
Like 7 years.
Here's how I would, how I've counseled others to handle those kinds of situations. First, the mayor, or if the person doesn't respect the mayor, then 1 or 2 other council members should go to that person and say, you know, what you're doing is really having a negative impact on your effectiveness as a council member. You've lost credibility not only with those you're seeking to persuade, but also with those who are on your side to begin with. It makes it hard for us to defend you and so forth, and it makes it very difficult for us then to push an agenda that you want to push, and have that kind of conversation and see if that results in a change of behavior. If it doesn't, you can begin escalating that conversation as a body with council member comments at the end. You can all gently at first say things like, you know, it's regrettable that council member so-and-so is engaging in his duties or her duties in this kind of way, because it's really disruptive and discourteous and so forth. And if that doesn't work, you can ratchet up until at some point a censure might be appropriate if it's really disruptive. You would think that sooner or later the constituents would pick up on how ineffective it is after being told over the course of several meetings that it's affecting their ability to advance their agenda.
Councilmember Brown. You had raised your hand.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the things is, as it stands right now, there's no kind of disciplinary scheme. The question we had, Colin and I had talked about, was, you know, what what, if any, penalty can be tacked on to a censure. I know that, you know, there's potential ordinance things you can do, but I guess the concern I hear you saying is, you know, if you have a situation where a member, you know, if you just keep censuring, it doesn't really stop that, and then it actually kind of escalates. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
putting water on a grease fire.
And it's particularly difficult right now, because we see at a national level, and we see in Lansing, politics of personal attack rather than politics of policy discussion.
Absolutely.
And that's happening on both sides of the aisle, so I'm not pointing any fingers in any particular direction. We just, and we see people walking around with chips on their shoulder, becoming outraged or offended at everything, rather than sitting and saying, you know, I really don't like what you said and the way you said it, but I understand the policy you're trying to discuss, so let's discuss the policy. And so it's difficult when everybody sees that going on the national stage and the statewide stage, to then in local government think that isn't the way how to do it.
Councilman Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Attorney Smith, I'm gonna be just very, very honest. That climate exists locally too. And, I think we have a situation where, you know, some of the behavior that we have to deal with is encouraged sometimes. I mean, so I'm saying basically that we're creating rules, but some of that stuff you just can't create a rule to, it just happens. That's where we are right now.
Right, but you can, and it's not going to be instant, but there are ways that the body itself can begin affecting that change. If a council member engages in inappropriate kinds of ways of interacting or is discourteous and so forth, you all can let he or she know that that's inappropriate. Not only with your comments, but then with other things, like when they speak, they don't get any reaction. Nobody engages with them. They just kind of get ostracized and out on their own, and nothing they do gets enhanced because nobody's willing to participate with them until they act appropriately. Now, that generally takes some time.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of patience on
Yeah.
the part of others.
Yeah.
But you can also begin getting the message across, look, you're gonna be wholly ineffective. You won't get your agenda advanced at all as long as all you're doing is bomb throwing.
Yeah, because I think that's one, the concern is, you know, after, you know, like some recent meetings, there was a policy discussion, or not even a discussion, there was a request for information by one member about an issue, and another member basically, and that's something, you know, I can call out of order, but accused them of a particular form of bigotry, right? There's a term used for that, right? And so the concern is that, and I think, I don't want to keep, you're giving us answers and we're taking it in honestly, we are listening. But I think it's and with no offense, it's, you know, how do you shame someone who might be shameless?
No shame.
And they have an audience
Yeah.
in the public
Councilmember Reed.
that likes it.
I had mentioned to the mayor that maybe he and the city manager could have a conversation with the person. But I see very little getting done at all. And I guess the thing that bothers me is, for one, things get very unsafe, you know. You heard us discussing that when we first came in. I don't like the idea of being up here with no way out, because people get to the point of where they'll leave and come back with whatever they need to get rid of whoever they want to get rid of, you know? And when you get into those kind of situations, one of our council people just don't give up. You know, that makes it a very unsafe situation for all of us. And then on the next thing, we have, I've talked to the EDC director and other people who have said, you know, people now know that we're on YouTube.
Yeah.
And they watch our meetings. And it's affecting businesses that would care to come to the city. Because if they see your council meetings being run like a three-ring circus, they do not want to be a part of anything like that. They're trying to find somewhere where they're going to, you know, succeed.
So, you know, you talk about safety, and safety during a meeting comes in a variety of ways, right?
Yes.
So we've got concerns about physical safety, and of course, the presence of law enforcement can help with that, I suppose. Remind me of a number of years ago, there was an incident, I think it was in Missouri, where somebody came in to get a fire at a council meeting, and the city attorney stood up and threw a chair at whoever it was and helped subdue him. And I said to some council I was with at the time, I said, this city attorney's crawling under. I said, this city attorney's gonna make himself as small as possible.
Oh, man.
But you got physical safety. You've also got safety if you're being called names and personally attacked and
Yeah.
called out.
'Cause,
Or if people are doing as they're doing now on the national stage, and when you go into a restaurant asking you to leave or harassing your kids at school and so forth, that's another kind of safety. You know, the council meetings ought to be marked by vehement policy discussion, sometimes strong disagreement. But you ought to be able to discuss the policy without discussing the personalities.
okay. And I, you know, just to repeat kind of what she was saying, because I think it takes an exorbitant amount of patience, because, you know, what happens is if someone, whether it's any of the council members, if a member were to say, well, such and such, this is your motive or intent in introducing that policy. Well, that clearly, you know, we're all accountable to the voters, so you have basically someone signaling.
Well,
Yeah.
and so how do you follow up on it? Okay?
Yeah.
As a chair, you ought to jump in right away.
Okay.
Please don't impute motives, that's inappropriate. We're debating policy.
Okay.
Regardless of the motives for the policy, the question is it
Yeah.
meritorious or isn't it meritorious, right? It's either good policy or it's not good policy. So the motives don't matter, and it's inappropriate to impute them, because you don't know what somebody's thinking.
Yeah.
And by the same token, there ought to be follow-up on that by other members of the council. When you get your council comments at the end of the meeting, you can say, you know, there were some comments tonight that weren't appropriate. And I would hope that we can, in our discussions in the future, focus on the policy and not try to impute motives or label things with inappropriate labels or whatever.
And this is part of it. I don't want to canvass here all night. I'm going to be expeditious, but something that Councilmember Reed and I discussed, and we'll come back to it under the agenda thing, but just in terms of when you're doing that, well, I'll bring it up then. Yeah, I'll bring it up then.
Okay, C, 5C. Council members should be recognized before they speak, and I would encourage you to think through in what order you're going to recognize folks. So normally, you would turn to the maker of the motion and allow the maker of the motion, once the motion's on the floor, to explain or speak in favor of the motion. Right? Normally, you would then ask for debate, and people would, as you've indicated, raise their hands, and you would generally call on them in the order in which they've raised their hands.
Okay.
Unless somebody's already spoken, and then you would generally allow somebody else, everybody the opportunity to speak before one person speaks twice.
Okay.
Now, you're allowing somebody to speak twice in the first round, is the way I'm reading that.
Can you go to that? 'Cause I thought we had my understanding was that it was like 10 minutes per member until everyone else who wanted to speak had a chance to speak.
Well, you say no council member shall speak more than twice on any question until every other council person's had an opportunity to speak at least once.
So the twice it's not, it should be better. Yeah, it should be worded better.
It indicates that they can speak 10 minutes at a time, so I'm just saying, if it's your
Okay.
intent that the total discussion be 10 minutes, and generally, you know, that seems to be a pretty good rule. If you can't persuade your fellow council people in 10 minutes, unless it's a prolonged, unless you've got an hour discussion at a work session or something, because if each council member speaks 10 minutes, you're talking about an hour for each agenda item.
So
And it
just,
gets to the point, excuse me,
Councilman Reed.
to the point that you don't even remember what's up.
Yeah.
To be voted on.
All right.
So just for clarification, so how we have operated, our understanding has been, is that there's 7 people, and each of us get 10 minutes to talk initially, right? So Councilmember Brown can make a motion, she gives her spiel for 10 minutes uninterrupted, assuming there's no parliamentary issues. Then Councilmember Reed gets to speak for 10 minutes. Then Councilmember Spicer, and he can get 10 minutes. Now, let's say Councilmember Brown wanted to speak again. She'd have to wait until I finish my 10 minutes, Councilmember French finished his. Councilmember,
Generally, I would say that should be the case.
Okay.
Unless Councilmember Reed wants to ask Councilmember Brown a question. Councilmember Reed may say to Councilmember Brown, I'm not sure I understood you. Can you clarify what you were trying to say about this or that? Or what you're suggesting as a possible amendment,
Okay.
so that I can see whether that's something maybe we can find consensus on.
so
You might have some debate or dialogue going back and forth, very respectful, not
Okay.
trying to question or personally debate.
Okay.
And the debate, you know, they can all address the chair if you want, but really they're addressing one another and not the chair. So it's the body addressing itself. What's inappropriate is for people here to look out at people in the audience or up to the camera and speak other than, because what you're trying to do is persuade your fellow council members or explain to your fellow council members why you're leaning the way you are on the question.
So now, did I understand you, because I want to make sure I understand, but you said something about, so let's say everyone has, with that interaction, everybody has spoken their 10 minutes, but then Councilmember Brown, who's initiated the motion, wants to speak again. Are you saying to tamp down, that the rule should be changed to stop that? Because like you said, we could keep going, I mean, we can always.
I'm saying you need to determine what you want to have there. I've seen some councils that say, no, it's 10 minutes overall, and once you've gone through your 10 minutes, you've gone through your 10 minutes, because otherwise I've got a situation where on any given issue, I can have over an hour of debate. If I've got 5 items on the agenda, I can have 5 hours of debate, or given that you've got 7 people, actually,
So
6 hours of debate.
So here's the flip side of rules, right? So, and I'm just being really frank. So let's say, because I've had a member mention this to me. Well, if someone feels that they're in the minority on that particular vote, they're gonna, they're hearing the conversation and say, okay, I think I'm gonna lose. Then there might be a hyper focus on the rules to say, well, did you give this person more time or that? So in communities that have limited that to 10 minutes per, who's keeping track of that?
Sometimes they keep track more often than not. They don't.
Okay.
And what you've really got to rely on is say, look, the general rule is try to keep it to 10 minutes.
Okay.
Overall, we don't need to have long debate. If you've got questions ahead of time that
Okay.
need to be answered, better to get those to the staff ahead of time so your questions are answered.
Okay.
If somebody feels particularly passionate, or it looks like the conversation is going in a way that might gel with a consensus around something, we'll let people interject and keep going. It really depends on how respectfully and on point people are staying, right?
Okay. So basically, we can just modify 5C to say 10 max per,
Yeah, generally should be limited to about 10 minutes.
okay.
Is what I would tell people, that, plan what you're gonna say pretty precisely, don't just start rambling. And if you plan it, you can have a pretty good pointed discussion.
Okay. Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. So am I hearing correctly, the suggestion is a 10-minute discussion in total?
No.
No.
Okay, but 10 minutes each council,
Each council member
Okay.
should say, generally, try to stay within 10 minutes.
Okay.
Hone what you're gonna say, focus on what you wanna say, focus on the important points. If you've got others on council, make sure you're not repeating one another, and you can get it accomplished.
thank you.
Same thing as a member of the audience, when you're limiting them to 3 minutes. They can lay out there what they need to lay out in 3 minutes generally.
Okay.
And you can always relax that if there's a reason to do that.
So, Councilmember Spicer?
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor, I just need some clarification from Attorney Smith. Clarify something. At the end of our meetings, we have on our agenda, future items for discussion. And any council member can put an item on the next agenda for discussion. So when we come to meet, the person that has, our practices, I think, is, from my understanding, what I've seen, is that the person that makes such a suggestion for the item on the agenda, when we meet and that particular item comes up for discussion, someone else may motion that, and someone else may support, even though the person who suggested the item go on the agenda didn't make the motion. And I heard you say the person that makes the motion should speak first. So that's it's kind of conflicting to me. Tell me how we should be
Well,
conducting.
generally, when you've got a motion on the table, somebody's asking the body to approve something or take some action. And it's appropriate at that point to ask an explanation. Why did you make that motion? Okay, now, it could be because, Councilmember Spicer wanted this on the agenda. I understand what she's trying to accomplish is this. I agree with that, that's why I'm making the motion. Or we've talked about this before, I don't think we need to talk about it again, so I'm making a motion to postpone this, whatever it might be. What I would suggest is that when you've got an item on the agenda, try to suggest what the action might be with respect to it. If you're putting it on the agenda just for discussion, then you ought to put an item on the agenda just for discussion and indicate it's probably inappropriate to make a motion on it. If you're putting it on the agenda to have action taken, then it's helpful if you recommend what action you're looking to have taken so that the motion, appropriate resolution can be drafted, right?
So, can you yield me real quick? Real quick.
Attorney Smith, should he be doing that? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
No. So, thank you for that question. It's a good question, because I hadn't thought about that. The other thing is, if it is an action, the person who's recommending can just try to make the motion first, right?
Right.
Or at least let,
Or as chair, which you can say the next item on the agenda at the request of
Okay.
Councilmember Spicer is,
Okay.
Councilmember Spicer, would you like to introduce
Okay.
this and make
Okay.
a motion?
Okay. The other thing, in line with that, is, and I had that under my agenda rule, but about, we have well, are there any other things you have about the conduct?
Let's see.
I did have a thing in 5C1, where it says call the member to order, says if any council member speaking.
Yeah, I've got the same thing. Only the chair can call
Yes.
somebody to order. Council member can make a point of order, but
Yeah,
only the chair can call it to order.
okay. So that needs to be corrected. But other than that, is there anything else in 5 that you see, or you saw?
Well, you've got legal counsel, and we're gonna probably carve this out anyway, but the chair or any member of the council may call upon the city's legal counsel in the meeting. Generally, the request should be made of the chair. Mr. Chair, would you ask the city attorney
Okay,
for an opinion? Because generally, a member of the body should ask through the chair to have somebody who's not a member of the body
okay,
talk about it. The only other thing is in E, the city manager is not a non-voting member of the body. The city manager is able to attend the meetings and participate in the discussion, but the city manager is not even a non-voting member of the council.
okay.
So how did, I'm sorry.
Councilman Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. So our charter is referenced there. So how does the charter read?
Well, the charter refers to the city manager as being able to attend the council meetings and participate in the discussion.
Okay,
But that doesn't make the manager a member of the
Gotcha.
council.
thank you.
And that's good for 5?
That's all I had.
Okay, so 6, was there any concern there? Okay. And I guess I could ask the clerk, do we send things to e-news, or should I be, we do? Okay, so 6 is good. 7, any concerns with 7? I mean, obviously, the last council member meeting, there was a situation there. But were there any kind of things that you noticed?
I would, there are a couple of places there, and at the end of subsection A and in subsection C, where it refers to the chair allowing deviation.
Okay,
And normally what I see happen there is that the member or chair will say, this may be an appropriate time to allow some deviation here.
okay,
Does any member of the council have an objection to that?
okay,
So that you're essentially asking for the consent of the council to deviate from the standard practice.
okay,
And that's probably a more appropriate way to do it, and also then keeps the chair from getting criticized as to allowing it in some circumstances and not in others. It's not the chair that's allowing it, it's the chair requesting the consent of the council to do it.
okay. Councilman Reed?
Mr. Mayor, I would also say, I think at the way we've been going, that we should have these things put on the agenda
Okay,
for the
I see what you're saying.
people to see, because some of them come in after the meeting has started, and the mayor has lately been starting to tell about these, so that people know that you've only got 3 minutes. At 3 minutes, you'll be asked to be seated. But if somebody comes in late and don't hear him say that, I think we need to attach this to the agendas so that they're well aware, because they get upset when you gavel them at 3 minutes when somebody else has had.
So
more than-
I've seen that done a couple of different ways. You can put it on the bottom of the
Yeah.
agenda. You can print it on the back of the agenda. I would be much more specific. What's appropriate decorum, for example?
Yes.
No personal attacks, no profanity, keep your voice down, use inside voices.
no clapping?
Right, no clapping, and that sort of thing. Speak to the chair.
Yeah,
Or to the body. Don't turn around and speak to the audience. Don't ask for any votes from the audience or anything like that. That's all inappropriate kind of conduct. And if you specify that, sometimes it's on the back, sometimes I've seen it taped to the podium itself, sometimes both.
Okay.
And, or it'll flash up on the screen during
you know,
the beginning of the comment.
Councilman Brown, then I have a comment.
I don't have my hand up, I'm sorry.
Okay, you headed up?
That's
What
okay.
it's crossed my mind, because, what ends up happening sometimes, I have my phone here, and I put my timer on, and I'll click it, and then I have a, I know another member might do it, they might signal 3 minutes up, I have 15 more seconds, but what I think we might start doing, and that's just like an internal thing, is maybe we could just kind of have a clock on the screen, and it's counting down, so everybody sees the same thing.
In Grand Rapids, Mayor Hartwell had 2 egg timers,
Okay,
and you would turn one over, and, when the egg timer ran out, everybody saw that your time was up. And when the next speaker got up, you use the other egg timer.
okay,
And that worked pretty well. It was a low-tech way of doing it, but it worked well. Others have a clock there or here or
Yeah.
someplace else that indicates that. It's certainly better than requiring somebody who may be taking
That's
notes
it.
or trying to listen intently to also be watching a timer.
And
okay.
I think that's gonna keep down a lot of confusion.
So one question I do have under citizens participation, and it's just minor, but under 7A, we say regular and special meetings, but like, for example, this is not a special meeting per se, this is a study session this evening.
Right.
So should we just say, because there's, but I guess I'm saying, does A need to be there? Because really, at every time we get together in a public meeting, there's gonna be a period for public comment. So should we, this is more of a kind of just a editorial
Right,
thing.
but what I would say is when you've got work sessions, first of all, I would only allow public comments at the end of that, not ahead of time.
Oh, okay,
Because there's really nothing on the agenda that's for the public to discuss. You're not making any decisions that night.
okay,
It's for you to study something
okay,
and to learn more about it. The council, the
Okay.
people can certainly listen in.
Okay.
And then if they want to speak at the end of the session on anything on the agenda or not on the agenda, let them do that.
where do we indicate that in the rules, would you suggest?
You can put that under the public participation section.
Okay.
I like having comments on agenda items at the beginning of the meeting, and then some communities allow you to speak when each agenda item is up. That can hopelessly prolong meetings, because people that are there to speak only on one issue then decide they're gonna speak on every issue.
So basically what I hear you saying is that the open meetings thing with the requirement for public comment is only for meetings where votes are being taken?
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, I allow people, I think you ought to allow people the chance to speak on items, because it certainly does, let some steam out. But
Okay.
I wouldn't let them, you've got a study session like this, why have them speak ahead of time? There's
Okay.
nothing for them to speak on
okay,
until after you've had the discussion.
Okay.
And then if you want to allow public comment after the discussion,
okay,
that might be informed and helpful.
okay. Because I can give you a really good example, which actually I think we're gonna have to do soon, is rental certification. So I know there are landlords, we're gonna have opinions about that. So what you're saying is when we have that study session, the landlords sit there until the administration is and the attorney have gone through everything, and then they can speak.
Right. That's
Okay.
what I would do.
Okay.
Say, okay, we're not making any decisions
Right.
tonight, so
Okay.
there's nothing you need to be afraid of in listening to the conversation.
Okay,
When the conversation's over, if you
Okay.
have additional insights, think we failed to look at something, we'd love to hear from you,
okay,
right?
okay,
Because then you've got informed discussion and input. When you're actually making decisions in a meeting, having public comment on agenda items ahead of time can help you.
okay,
And you have those who want, part of the purpose of having the public comment is to allow people to petition their local officials.
okay,
It's kind of a way to make you aware of what might be going on.
okay,
I also think that you can put additional restraints on that.
okay,
You can say, look, we're here to listen to any comments you have on issues of local concern. If you're here to talk about the national defense budget, there isn't anything I can do about that,
okay,
right? If you're here to talk about who's gonna be appointed to the Supreme Court, that's beyond anything I can do. If you're talking about the tax policy in Lansing, I can't do anything about that. Now, if
Okay.
you're here to ask us to adopt a resolution
okay,
addressing something in Lansing, that's fine.
okay,
but again, I think you can rule people out of order.
Okay.
I sat with the Macomb County Board of Commissioners. I was their outside counsel for a number of years. And there was a man who came up, they have public comment at the beginning of the meeting and the end of the meeting, and he can talk about it, anything, either time. And they allow 5 minutes. So this guy took 5 minutes at the beginning and 5 minutes at the end of the meeting, talking about communist China.
Okay. Okay.
Just ranting about communist, well, there wasn't anything the county government was gonna do about
Yeah.
communist China.
Yeah. So, in 7, continuing on, is there any other thing one thing that, under G, because I know there's some times when, like, you might have a resident and their neighbor's grass is like 3 feet or something, it's crazy, and they take a picture. And, they're busy, so they don't have time to come and give it to the clerk and all of that. If we eased up on the day limit, what's the danger in that? Because there are some people who
See,
come in.
I don't think there's any problem with that. I think you can say, look, if you wanna hand something out that goes to all the council members with permission of the chair, you can hand it to the clerk, and the clerk will make sure each council member gets it.
Okay.
So if you're coming up here complaining about somebody's long grass, or their unplowed snow, or a particular condition of a sidewalk, or a street light that's out, whatever it might be, and you've got pictures or information, that's fine, hand it to the clerk, or if appropriate, hand it to the city manager, and we'll follow up on it after the meeting,
Okay.
right? We'll get more detail.
Okay.
And that's particularly helpful if somebody's coming with a statement to read. Sometimes you can say, rather than reading that statement, if you just wanna hand it out to all council members, we can make sure that they all get a copy of it,
Okay.
and you won't need to stand up and read it. If you wish to read it, go ahead, but.
So if I'm gonna read through it really quickly, just to make sure I'm understanding. So basically, we're saying if they wanna provide us copies of any kind of supporting documents or materials, they're encouraged to do it prior to the start of the meeting, so that's cool. I have no
Right.
problem with that. Then it says the use of electronically displayed materials by citizens during public comment segment is not allowed. Then it says an exception is given if prior permission is given by the chair and the materials are provided to the city clerk's office at least 2 business days. Is that arbitrary, or?
No, I don't think that's arbitrary. So if somebody's, let's say the local chamber wants to come and give an award or make a presentation.
Okay.
You've got a short 2-minute video to show you.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. We can do that. You may have somebody from the MEDC that comes and wants to make a report, or a county commissioner that's coming and says, I've got a few slides on the equalization.
Okay.
And that may be appropriate and helpful.
Okay.
And you may wanna make an exception.
Okay.
You might not wanna put an agenda item on, but let them speak as a member of the public, because
So is the concern, I guess what I'm saying is, it's more about, concern about, I don't know if I can say this, not necessarily the content, but it is kind of the content. So basically, if someone came in to meeting at the last minute and tried to hand something out, but there was something inappropriate about it, okay, we could say, oh, don't, no, right? All right, 'cause I mean, I don't know if somebody can do that. But I guess what I'm trying to say in terms of the audio and electronic, is there?
I think the problem with that is just the logistics of setting it all up at the
Okay.
last minute.
Okay.
I mean, even when I was here in January and sent it ahead of time, right?
Okay.
We had some difficulties getting
Okay.
the electronics to mesh.
Okay.
And so you've got all of that issue. You can't do sound checks if you get it at the last minute to make sure that the audio is gonna be, that people can hear it and so forth. So it's really better if you get it ahead of time, and then you can time it, make sure it's within the time constraints, and make sure that there's nothing inappropriate. You wouldn't want somebody, and inappropriate can be all kinds of things. You wouldn't
Yeah.
want somebody to show an accident scene shortly after an accident. It
Yeah.
might be disturbing.
Yeah.
Right.
So basically, there's no other concerns you have in Rule 7?
No.
Okay. So Rule 8, yeah, so Rule 8, the 2 things, well, I'll let you go if you see anything, but I had 2 things. But.
No, I don't, you need to determine what your agenda procedure is gonna be, and, I've worked with enough city staffs in a number of situations to know that once that agenda begins to gel, there's a lot of scrambling around that occurs to
Yeah.
get information together, get resolutions drafted, get resolutions proofread and defined, and refined, get cover memos on, line up the staff to attend if there are questions that they're gonna be asked and so forth. So, the further ahead they know what's coming down, what they're being asked to do, the better off everybody is.
So,
Cause there's a mad scramble for that.
so I guess the question is, so from my understanding, the charter says that the clerk prepares.
Yes.
And that's the only charter language that we're given. So then, at one point, in an earlier draft of this, there was language that said, 2 members have to request to put something on the agenda, and we removed that because we thought, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense, because that means the assistant DPW director.
I view what the clerk does is physically putting together and preparing the agenda,
Yes.
not deciding what goes on the agenda and what doesn't go on the agenda. The agenda is the agenda for the body.
Okay.
And the body should decide how, within charter constraints, what business is going to be undertaken at what meetings, and how it's going to be undertaken and so forth. Are we gonna study it first? Or are we gonna go right to a resolution?
And I think what we deal with is the fact that, like with the school board, I'll bring them up. When Albion in the school district, there was like a first meeting where basically, we meet twice a month, but we don't have a committee of the whole kind of thing where because we'd be meeting every Monday. And so the issue is, how do we set the agenda in a way that doesn't give, and I don't be really direct, doesn't give me dictatorial power over the agenda or the manager, or, so we want to make sure.
Well, I think you ought to have some general rules of thumb as to how you're gonna deal with some things, and recognize that there will always be reasons why, from time to time, you need to deviate from the general rules. But most local governments work with the idea of, you're never gonna act on something the first time it appears on the agenda, right? So whether we set up a study session because it's gonna be a long conversation,
Yeah.
or whether it's a discussion item at the end of the agenda that says, look, at the next meeting, we're gonna have a resolution for your consideration to do X, Y, and Z. If you have some questions about that, let's talk about it now.
Okay.
It may appear just as a discussion item for 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
It may appear and say, this is what the administration's working on. If you have questions or concerns, contact the city manager's office about what direction.
Yeah, and I'm going to say something because I saw some kind of perplexed looks from some of the members. One of the concerns, and this is even before a previous manager, I'm going back because I've been on council for about 7.5 years. I think there's always been, from a council person's perspective, a concern about like last minute things. So what we did, like the earliest thing we did, we just did that as like it was either a resolution or it may have been just a motion, but what we did is we said, hey, we want the agendas delivered to us by Wednesday. And that doesn't mean that there couldn't be changes made, but at least we have an understanding. So now what's usually normally happen, like you said, and I know I probably frustrate the clerk a lot, but I think what happens sometimes, it's like, Thursday, but it's either Wednesday or Thursday. But what we're trying to, the concern that I had in the subcommittee, and Councilman Brown probably can speak to this, is it shouldn't be harder, in theory, for a council member to get an agenda going before the council than, let's say, an administration officer.
It shouldn't be. So, administration officers, I'll give you a current example. City of Wyoming is going to have a closed session to discuss a lawsuit on July 16th. city manager has alerted the council, that that's coming up in a weekly memo and said, you know, on July 16th, your agenda is gonna be pretty full. Here are 5 or 6 things that you're gonna be asked to vote on. If you've got any questions about them, let me know. If you need to have some individual discussion about it, let me know. So that, but, you know, because of time constraints, they're coming to you on the 16th. I can't get them to you on the 2nd. We're not gonna have everybody there on the 2nd anyway, so the 16th will just be a longer meeting. And we're doing that rather than having a number of different study sessions during the summer when everybody would just as soon be someplace else than City Hall. So that's how the administration does it there, to alert council members that things are upcoming. Sometimes they will put things on the agenda because they want more formal reaction from council. So there will be a discussion item. Another city has discussion items at the end of every agenda. They'll have 5 or 6 items that aren't on for action, but saying in another couple of council meetings, you're going to see these items. You know, we got wastewater treatment plant improvements. We've got, there's this rezoning that's going to be coming up. Here's generally what's going on. Here's some background information. If you have other questions, let me know. So there are a variety of ways you can do that that are less formal than necessarily having a first and second reading and all of that kind of thing.
Okay, so to, I guess, move us kind of quickly along here. So basically, 8A1, 2, and 4. There.
You know, I think getting an agenda to council on a Wednesday ahead of the meeting is really asking a lot of your staff and asking a lot of one another. Essentially, all you're doing is giving them a week between the last meeting and this meeting to get the agenda together. Because if they're getting it to you on Wednesday, they've got to have it ready to print Tuesday afternoon. So really what you're saying is they come in tomorrow morning, if this were a regular agenda night, they come in tomorrow morning and they're creating the agenda that's got to go out in 1 week. That's not a lot of time. If they get it to you on a Friday afternoon, most of you are going to read it over the weekend anyway. And you can say all agenda items have to be in by Wednesday noon so that we can begin getting the agenda copied on Thursday and emailed out to you Friday morning.
Okay. So because I you know, we spent some time, like, and this has kind of been inoperable. I mean, it's been just.
You'll have too many changes between Wednesday and Monday.
Yeah. So what can you suggest language that can replace 1 and 2? Because basically what I'm trying to see is something that respects the responsiveness of government, so that if a resident has a concern, the council member feels the council should do something or start considering it, they don't have to wait 2 weeks to bring it up. But then on the other hand, so basically it's basically to protect council and protect the administration. We don't want the administration to be asked to put together this huge plan on a Tuesday for the following Monday, but on the flip side, council doesn't want to have a, you know, oops.
Well, there are situations where you have to act quickly, right? Snow plow breaks, you need to buy another snow plow. You're gonna have to act quickly. You get bids in, you're gonna wanna act relatively quickly after you get those bids to accept or tentatively award the bid, so that you lock in the bid prices and then can get your financing in place and so forth. So there are a lot of times when you're going to need to act more quickly. You may have a citizen complaint, you may have some property damage, whatever, and that's what I said. You'll have exceptions to the rule, but you can say generally, it's the goal that no item be acted upon at the first meeting at which it's discussed.
Okay. So then how, and maybe we have to get some language. So like, for example.
I can provide you some language on that and borrow from other communities.
Because this, like, and this is like that, you know, 8A1, that's a section that strikes me as actually violating the charter, right? Because the charter says, you can put anything on the agenda before noon, the day of the meeting.
Right, but I think you can have kind of your general guidelines, like anything going on the agenda the day of the meeting. We may discuss it, but except in an emergency, we're unlikely to take action on it till the next meeting.
Okay.
That's just gonna be our rule of thumb.
Okay, so to move forward, you'll provide us some suggested language for like 1, 2, 4. Question 5, quick question there. Other councils have this thing on the agenda where they approve the agenda. We don't do that. Should we not do that? Should we add that? Because right now, what we have right now is there are moments where, for example, there was a Boy Scout who was going for his Eagle Scout promotion. And it was not on the agenda to approve, I can't remember what it was, but he needed some kind of approval from us. That motion was made as kind of like a point of order thing. Do we need to add approval to the agenda to our agenda format?
Most councils do that,
Okay.
because there may also be some items that are on a consent agenda that somebody wants removed because they want discussion on it. There may be items that somebody thinks ought to be postponed at the last minute for one reason or another.
Okay.
There may be items like that get added, and somebody can say, or I want to add a proclamation for so-and-so, or want to add a proclamation of sympathy for the family of somebody who passed away, or whatever it might be.
Okay.
And you'll want the ability, I think, to add to the agenda with the consent of the council at that point.
Okay. So we can probably go to page 7. I'm trying to move us through here. Should we insert that after city manager report?
Yeah, or you can do it, a lot of times it's done right after the roll call.
Okay. Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you. I think I may need to go back. I'm looking at the Rule 8, the agenda and business number 4.
Okay.
Attorney Smith, I think you stated that, you indicated that requesting that the agenda be provided to council on the Wednesday prior to the regular meeting is somewhat of a constraint for administrative staff. And I just want you to, I think you're gonna rework that, you're gonna work with the mayor to rework that language. Did I understand that correctly? Right. Okay, can you just, in working with him, consider that this is in council rules. However, it doesn't always happen that way. So I'm afraid that moving the date to have to council will make us get it even later. Because we rarely get it on Wednesday. I can rarely recall getting it on Wednesday. So we actually get it like a Thursday or Friday, and that's because the clerk is around and whatever. So I think moving the date might not be, we don't get it anyway.
Because I'll just add to that, and
let me just finish.
I'm sorry.
And I think that this gives us an opportunity to do our due diligence as a council member. I mean, some of us work full-time, we have kids, we have families, and so getting it on a Friday or a weekend, moving that day to like Friday or something, I think it just would be pushing it for council members. Just something to consider.
But it's also pushing it for you all to get stuff on the agenda that Wednesday ahead of time too. And particularly if you're just alerting council a day or two, or the staff a day or two ahead of time, unless they're here till midnight, they're not gonna be able to put together a solid agenda item.
Yeah, because one of the things I think about is, and this is like first year on council, there's a situation where it was relative to the streets, and we're in a cycle with the state and the county for major street funding. And there was a document that was presented to me, and I was curious about when a particular street was scheduled. So I was able, I think I got my packet on a Friday, but I called MDOT and talked to that office, and they explained a particular scenario, but that happened Monday. So I kind of think what the Councilmember Spicer's getting at is, if we, and I guess you're kind of answering that in a way too, if we get something and we want to do our due diligence, what you're saying is if we do get it happen to get it on a Friday, then the best practice then is just to say you don't take any action until,
The first thing you're hearing about it is on that agenda. You're unlikely to take final action on it
Okay.
on that agenda anyway.
what,
And that gives you time to get it worked out. But here's what happens, the practical matter for the staff. Okay, so you'll have a council meeting on a Monday night. Staff will get together on Tuesday or Wednesday generally and debrief after that council meeting. And as a result of that debrief, they're going over all of the things that council members have asked for more information about. They're looking at what's on the next agenda, who's gonna do what to put together what agenda items, and so forth. And they begin scrambling around then for the next meeting. Now, understand that this isn't the only thing that the clerk has to do. There's all the regular filing. She has to get all of the documents signed and delivered to everybody. She's got a plan for elections. So there are all kinds of other things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, plus all of the walk-in traffic at the window, handling FOIA requests, whatever else may be coming in. So they're balancing all of this, and what I'm seeing is there are some bodies that have well, I've worked with one council where they'd have two council meetings a month, and they'd have a work session on the alternate day. They had staff that did nothing but full-time prepare agenda items, because that's all they had time to do. I don't think you have any appreciation that the normal agenda packet that you get may take 40 or 50 hours of staff time to put together. Now, that's not all the clerk's time, but there's a ton of staff time that goes into putting those together. And you have to recognize that when you request something, there's a lot of homework that goes into putting that together.
so then and I respect that. So then the question, and I don't want to speak for you all or the council, but I think the one thing is, so what can the council, because this came up several months ago, what can the council do? Yes, because I was on the council once where a salt spreader went out, $9,000 salt spreader, and we had to approve that. So I get that. It's a last minute emergency thing.
Right.
But there are some things that aren't emergencies, and I'm not trying to attribute any kind of motive to administration, but I think from a council perspective, I think sometimes there is a concern about being rushed for certain things that may have been known earlier.
Right.
And so that's basically.
Well, again, I think you just tell the administration, general rule is we're not acting on anything that's the first time we see it on the agenda.
Okay.
It better be a discussion item, you better be alerting us in a weekly memo.
Okay.
Or something else, because if the first we're seeing it is on the agenda, you're unlikely to get a positive response.
Councilmember Reese, Councilmember Spicer.
I agree, because if you see something on there that you think needs more work on it, you got time to call a work session.
Yeah.
And discuss it before you go have the next meeting. But I don't know.
Right,
I just-
and as I said, sometimes that can be in just a weekly memo that the manager sends to the council. This is what you're gonna have upcoming. If you have questions, let me know.
Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you. Attorney Smith, Mayor, thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I deeply appreciate you. And
Yeah.
if my husband would be offended, I might say I love you. But you have enlightened me so much to this point. So I just want to thank you very much. And to know that we don't have, being new, let me just back up and slow down, on council, a year and a half, been on here, I was under the impression that when we received our packet and there was something on the agenda, we had to just go forth with it and do our due diligence as quickly as we could. You've enlightened me that does not have to happen. I can come in and thank you so very much. I appreciate that. Wow.
Councilmember Reese.
I like to have it just in time to study and be knowledgeable of what it is. But then after you study and be knowledgeable, you still have questions, which can come at a later time.
Right.
So if you could basically compose something that gets at the spirit of that, it's basically,
Right.
we want to respect the administration, but then we also want to have time to do our due diligence, and that,
And it requires a mutual respect,
Yeah.
because the administration then also, you need to be able to trust them that they will come to you and alert you as to things they see that are upcoming before
and,
you
and I'll,
have to act on them.
and I will, commend, Attorney Harkness, because you do that. You do say, hey, there's a state law change, or there's an ordinance that needs to be done, and so we do know that, so, yeah, I will,
So I'm not,
yeah.
I don't know what occurs here and what doesn't occur here. I can just tell you based on what I see in other places.
Okay. So you're gonna fix basically 1 through 5. We're gonna add, would there be any objection to adding, like I'm just talking to council as consensus, to adding an agenda approval after the roll call? Nobody would object to that. That's basically, if we need to make a change, we can discuss it. I don't see any objection to that. I would add, and it's not here, but I think there needs to be a time limit on presentations, because there was one person a couple months ago who did a presentation that was like a video, and the video was like almost like 7 or 10 minutes long. So have you seen that in other communities where they put a time limit on presentations?
Normally, unless there's a reason for something to go longer, normally they ask somebody to spend 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay.
Again, because you've got a lot of stuff on the agenda, and it's,
Okay. Okay.
if you got a budget presentation, it might take longer.
Okay. Plus, under consent calendar, we probably should add, what we've been doing lately is like just any kind of miscellaneous permits, because we'll have approval for like, an assembly permit for Victory Park for something, and so we probably should say minutes and miscellaneous.
Yeah, I also think that if you've got to schedule a public hearing on something, you can do a resolution to schedule a public hearing on the consent calendar.
Okay. Okay. The other thing, and we'll bring this back up because you mentioned it, we talked about it, and Councilmember Spicer just seemed like she was approving of it. We currently have one section for councilmember comments at the beginning of the meeting, okay? Having seen the meetings, do you suggest that we put another one after the public comment?
I'd just have the council comments at the end of the meeting.
Wow.
Because council gets to comment on every agenda item anyway, right? That's the purpose of the debate.
Okay.
They get to comment on it. So the end of the meeting would be the time to comment on things that aren't on the agenda.
So the one thing I think usually happens, and I'm just throwing this out as to kind of think through it. Let's say there's going to be, I don't know, a potluck for a community thing. And I know that people watching or in the audience are going to leave and it's 8 o'clock, I need to go. Is it better to have that at the beginning where people are seeing that versus having to look through the whole meeting? Councilman Brown, I'm just throwing it out there.
Thank you, Mayor, I can answer that. We're on YouTube. They can go watch the meeting anytime, even if they do get up and leave.
Okay.
The other thing you can do is just put that kind of announcement on the agenda someplace,
Okay.
Whether it's a potluck or in some communities, it's coffee with the mayor or
Okay.
coffee with council members or something like that. It'll be Tuesday, such and such at noon.
So do we need to move the report for manager, administration boards and stuff? Does that need to be moved too? Or does that stay right there?
I usually put those at the end of the agenda too. Because you've got all of the business items that you have to get to, and then if there are general discussion items, and that's the only thing the manager ought to be reporting on, or council members would be general discussion items, because they're not action items at that point. I would put those at the end of the agenda. The advantage of that is then if your business has gotten to be too long and it's getting on 10:30, people can say, I can wait till a later meeting, or I can just call and ask that it be added to an agenda.
Okay, so basically, the council comments and administration comments move to the end.
That's what I would do, but you can do what you want.
And we have a section called future agenda items, which Councilmember Reed brilliantly added to the agenda several years ago. Does that need to be maintained, or how does that fit with what you're?
I've seen that done multiple ways. Oftentimes, future agenda items are there to let somebody know what's coming up or what we're gonna have a work session on or whatever.
Okay.
Here's the schedule for budget consideration, you know?
Okay, so basically place council comments and administration comments, basically, essentially right before adjournment.
Right. I usually even put it after public comment.
I thought you were gonna say I put it after adjournment.
I put it after public comment because
Okay,
then the council has a chance, if necessary, to follow up on that public comment, you
Okay.
know. Mr. Manager, will you get back to so-and-so on the concern they raised?
okay. Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Attorney Smith, for broadening my understanding of council rules and procedures. He basically just kind of answered the question I was going to ask, because putting council comments at the end of the agenda instead of at the beginning, then in our comments, we can also at that time answer questions from the public, because we oftentimes, public will come up in public comments and say, such and such and such, and my council person, can you da-da-da-da, and our rule is to not respond to
Right.
public questions during public comment.
Right.
So at that time, during the council comments, would that be an appropriate time to answer?
Sure. At that time, you might say, Mr. Mayor or City Manager, there've been some questions about the leaf pickup procedure. Can you just respond to that at this point?
So, I think, I mentioned that, I think the feasibility of that, having the comment after public comment, is at least in our practice, in the current composition of this body, is a matter of what we talked about earlier, in terms of if a particular member saw that as an opportunity to bash, showboat, banter with the audience.
Well, again, generally, that's an opportunity to follow up and clarify,
Okay,
not to debate.
okay,
I mean, you're not debating policy at that point. You're asking questions or clarifying, you're asking for somebody to get back to somebody.
Okay.
You're asking for something to be put on a future agenda, whatever it might be.
Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea, because if they're gonna start the bash, say, okay, you know, that's not what this is for, I wanna help you, but we're not going to do it.
Right. I wouldn't respond, I would wait till you close the public comment section. Ask the manager for any report, then say comments from the public, or comments from the council.
So I have a question that might be,
And the reason you ask for the manager report, the manager may say, I just want to clarify a couple of things that were brought up. Here's what we've done and why we've done it. We'll
Yes.
answer any questions.
so one of the things, this came up, one of the members mentioned this to me, and it kind of goes back, but it's all throughout all the rules. It's not inappropriate for the chair to allow the council members to debate an issue or have a discussion, and then come back after the chair has basically taken in the consensus of what's actually going on, the terrain of the discussion, and to say, this is what I'm hearing. Maybe we should do this, right? Because, you know, I know there's been objection.
I think that's the function of the chair. is
Okay.
To try to determine the consensus or the will of the body and give voice to that. So
Okay.
it sounds like I've got a majority of the body that wants to do X, Y,
Yeah.
or Z. Maybe we ought to, at this point, postpone action, allow the administration to go back
Okay.
and reformulate the recommendation based on the discussion tonight. Or
Okay.
it sounds like we've got a majority ready to proceed on the issue.
Okay.
And further debate's not gonna be helpful. Perhaps we ought to vote. Any objections? If not,
And I've raised that because I've had members outside of our official proceedings, you know, individually, say, oh, well, you know, why do you come after and then try to kind of shape my swan song kind of moment, and what I just want to make clear that it's not inappropriate for me, after I hear everything, to try to piece it together, because ultimately it's going to a vote anyways.
No, as long as the chair's doing that in a fair fashion.
Okay.
And that's accurately reflecting the will of the body.
Okay.
Accurately reflecting if there is a strong minority opinion and so forth, that's fine.
Okay.
That's what you ought to be doing to help bring the body towards some action or other.
Okay.
Whether the action's to postpone, to study more, to
Okay.
amend the motion, whatever it might be.
Okay. The next two, so is there anything under 8, anything else under 8 that you had a concern with?
Nope.
Okay. 9 and 10, we don't have to go into detail because those are pretty much probably drawn from charter and statute. Did you see any issues with 9 or 10? I'll leave that to you.
You know, I would say that, I would ask that all resolutions be written.
Okay.
Even if it's only in the agenda, it would be appropriate to, or the cover memo or something, an appropriate motion might be, because that gives guidance as to what you're doing, so you're not trying to formulate the wording up here, and it makes it much easier for the clerk,
Okay.
who then doesn't have to track the debate and the motion said differently 4 or 5 times.
And I think that has happened, but I think that's tied to what we were talking about earlier about not taking something on the first
Right.
reading, right?
Now, the exception to that obviously are procedural motions, a motion to postpone, a motion to amend, and so forth. You're always gonna have those come up during the course of the debate, but generally, if the agenda item, either the agenda itself, as is done in some communities, or the cover memo, or an attached resolution has the wording, you're much better off.
So a real life hypothetical, going back to that Boy Scout thing. So he has a deadline, I can't remember, it's pretty quick.
Right.
And we did not have a resolution. He didn't really, because he hadn't talked to
Right.
either the council member or the administration. And a member here proposed, well, we added it to the agenda for approval. There was a vote made on a motion to approve whatever it takes to have him do that. How would you handle a situation where there's a time issue? We don't want to call a special meeting.
I might ask the city attorney if he could prepare the wording for resolution.
Okay.
And hand it to the clerk to be read or something. If you know ahead of the meeting when that's gonna be done, or you're adding it to the agenda, but at the beginning of the meeting, the city attorney, the city clerk, the city manager could come up with an appropriate motion to be read during that point in time.
Okay.
That's one way of
In the
doing
course
it.
of the meeting?
Yeah, part of me would like to tell the Boy Scout that citizenship in the community merit badge would mean that you would have to be more foresighted.
Okay.
And so if you're trying to do that for your Eagle Scout project,
Yeah. I don't want to bash him. I'm not bashing him. I'm just, yeah, I'm not bashing him at all.
That was,
So, but you have no other issues other than all resolutions written, that you have no issues with 9 or 10?
no.
Okay. 11, so I'll say this, 11, there was her name was Coco Seward. She was the former mayor of Birmingham. Are you familiar with her? She does a lot of MML facilitation. So she gave us and I did not bring it, but a very helpful golden whatever, yellow
I've
thing.
seen what she hands out, yeah.
Yes, and that's been very helpful to us. So
Yes.
we want to use that, and so I guess my question is, we still kept as Appendix B what Port Huron did, and this might just be like a clerical thing we need to do to reformat it, but do we need to have Rule 11? Is Rule 11 necessary if we're going to have the gold thing integrated?
Probably not.
Okay.
And you're probably better not saying it twice. You're probably better saying, look, we'll follow the format on the attached appendix.
Okay.
I think that's an easier way to do it than
Okay.
try to restate it twice.
Okay. Now 11C, because we've dealt with this before. So a council member has the right to withdraw his or her motion.
Yep.
That's probably inappropriate, right? Because once it's on the agenda, it's the business of the entire council, correct?
Well, once it's on the table, it's the business of the entire council. Just putting it on the agenda doesn't make, the motion has to
Okay.
be offered. So once it's on the table, it's the business of the entire council. And, you know, I tend to be a little lax on that, saying as long as the minutes can accurately reflect the intention of the body, you're in pretty good shape. So if you get into discussing it and somebody's thinking to myself, you know, this is a dumb motion the way I proposed it, I'd like to withdraw the motion. And the person supporting it says,
Okay.
yeah, I would agree with that, that's fine.
So,
If the chair wants to recognize that, and the rest of the body has no objection, fine.
okay. The scenario I was thinking about is, let's say Councilmember Spicer puts A on the agenda. And then she gets to and it's on there, and it's placed on there before noon of the meeting. So once it's, the way I understand the charter is whatever's in place on the agenda at noon is locked in place, and it takes a 2/3 majority at the meeting to take it off. So which we're doing, when we add that approval of the approval of the agenda, and Councilmember Spicer says, okay, well, you know, I wanted to have A on there, I want to take it off, but she can't take it off by herself. So that is the correct understanding?
Right,
Okay.
because it's on, you're amending the agenda at that
Okay.
point.
Okay,
And yes, you're asking for the body's consensus or consent to have the
Okay.
agenda amended.
okay. Is there anything, and I know the clerk is probably gonna be really mad for me asking this, is there anything where when I first got on council, we did everything by roll call, then we integrated voice vote. Is there anything in the charter that says that we have to do roll call at everything, or?
Well, anytime you're going into closed session, you should do it by a roll call vote, because it requires a 2/3 vote. And, you know, I'd have to go back and look at your charter. I haven't looked at your charter specifically on the voting requirements, but,
Yeah, because
in a lot of communities, it's done by a voice vote unless it's not unanimous, and then somebody will ask for hands to be raised so you can record which way it went.
Okay. And I think de facto what we've done is we've done anything like with money or ordinances or stuff we do. But I just want some clarification, because if we can speed things
Yeah,
up, that's better.
I'll look at the
Charter doesn't address voice voting.
Okay,
Then I think it can be done by a voice vote anytime, and
okay,
to the extent somebody wants their no vote recorded, they can ask the clerk to,
okay,
can you show that I voted no?
okay. Okay, and that's the division
Right,
of the House thing, right?
yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think you have to do a roll call. You can just ask that the minutes reflect the no votes.
Okay. So 11 might just be collapsed, unless there's,
I thought the appeals in 12 was written pretty well.
okay. Should point of order, should 13 come before 12?
I don't think it matters.
Okay. 14. Because, well, I'll say this way, Port Huron had reconsideration, we completely removed that. But that's one of those things where, because we're a small town and things are, we're kind of bare bones staff, we really haven't.
So here's the danger of that. Robert's rules says that you can reconsider a motion only at the same session.
Okay.
And that a motion to reconsider has to be made
Okay.
and supported by those that were on the prevailing side of the motion.
Okay.
So if you've got a 4-3 vote on something,
Mm-hmm.
2 of those 4 would have to move and support a motion to reconsider, and it would have to be done, most people would interpret that it would have to be done before the end of that meeting, otherwise the matter is done and decided.
Okay.
That doesn't work in a lot of settings, because sometimes you have something occur where somebody will come and say, wait a minute, you didn't understand something, or I got some of the numbers wrong, or something else. And so, you know, I would say that you might wanna deal with reconsideration in a way other than Robert's rules do.
Yeah, because what happened there, there were two incidents, I don't want to bring them up in gory detail, but there was something at the very beginning of this council setting, there was a kind of grant application that was voted down and brought back. And then there was a thing with the previous manager with a salary thing.
Right.
And so I'm open to, if you can propose language that might help with that, because what we don't want is, and actually, you know, I was accused by, I shouldn't say accused by, but there was a member of the council who spoke to me after a vote that we took on medical marijuana dispensaries. Same thing, like the council initially did 4 of the 5 licenses, and then came back, you know, Battle Creek did all 5, and so we came back and added the 5th. But that's one of those situations where how much leeway do we want to give ourselves? Because what I don't.
Yeah, because then what ends up happening, where you don't deal with it otherwise, is people are scrambling around to come back with something that's a little different motion or a little different action. And then the question is, aren't you just asking us to again take up what we decided at the last meeting? There's not really a significant change here, is there?
Yeah.
And
Or
so
you're
you're scrambling around to try to say, well, there is a significant change because. And sometimes it's just because there was a misunderstanding that you're trying to correct.
or if there was a, let's say a 4-5 or something, there might be someone who wants to go back and try to reconvince.
Right, or you might have a 3-3 vote,
Yeah.
right? Because somebody's absent, so it doesn't pass, but the prevailing vote is out there, so what do you do?
Yeah. So if you could just provide, like I said, we completely left it out.
No, I've got some rules with reconsideration in them, so.
Okay. 15. Anything with suspending the rules? Any concern there? The one thing I might be, there was nothing with 16? Okay. 17, did you have any issues with 17?
No, I think case law makes it pretty clear that a failure to vote is a breach of your duty,
Okay.
so.
I don't know, wait a minute, I'm missing 16. Yeah, I don't know 16.
I don't either, I guess.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
15, and then we go to 17.
That, you know what happened is, isn't this it? No, 16, I'm sorry, 16 was reconsideration.
Okay,
Yeah, it was removed.
okay.
That's what happened to it. Because, 16 was reconsideration. Yeah, so that's why it's gone. So nothing in issue with voting. Now, that takes
No,
up.
except that you want to make it clear that you're going to allow for a voice vote in most
Okay.
cases, right?
Okay. Let's see. So one question I have about this, this one question. So the charter has a thing about like a financial interest. Okay. When someone, the council, even someone proposes that they have an interest. Well, we'll put it this way, there's 2 scenarios. There's one where I feel that council member A does have, and I'm saying they do, and they need to be not voting. And there's one with the other person admits that they think they might have, right? In both cases, the council has to determine that, right? Okay.
Right. And the difficulty there is, so you've got one statute on contracts with public servants that deals with a situation where somebody's in front of you and they've got an interest in that particular contract. You've got other situations that people think are a conflict of interest because somebody's 4th cousin twice removed is a relative.
My cousin.
And may have, that gives them a conflict of interest. I've seen people come before planning commissions and say, well, you live within 2 blocks of that development, so you've got a conflict of interest. It's not a conflict of interest, right? It's not a conflict of interest if you all will be affected by any tax you levy, by any water or sewer rate you increase and so forth. That's not a conflict of interest either. So you have to have a direct financial interest to really have a conflict of interest.
Okay.
And, you know, most people say, well, you know, how can he be unbiased? Well, just because you may think somebody's biased doesn't mean there's a conflict of interest, right?
Okay.
Because my best friend has an interest in that business doesn't mean that I've got a conflict of interest voting on the contract.
Okay. The other question I have, and just clarifying it, I don't know if I want to open that up, but you're here. So it's kind of parliamentary, but if a member is the subject of a censure, do they vote in that vote? In line with Roberts and the charter?
Yeah, I'd have to look.
Okay. Okay.
Normally, somebody that was the subject of action by the council wouldn't vote on that particular matter in the same way that if I think I've got a conflict of interest, I don't vote on whether I have a conflict of interest, right?
Okay.
So whether my conduct rises to the level that I should be censured for it, normally I wouldn't vote on that.
Okay. Okay. So there's nothing else in voting? Okay, I'm sorry. I appreciate council's everyone's patience. I just want to, okay, and that's it. And so what's going to happen is the Appendix B and 11 are going to basically turn into Coco Siewert's yellow sheet. And then the one thing that I want to ask you is, so Appendix A, this large document, in what way can that be turned into a new Rule 2 that says, basically what you presented to us, you know, this is the mayor's role, this is the council role, and council members' role, this is the manager's role, and this is the city attorney's role, right? Can you do?
So, yes, I think what we can do is say that council members shall respect the roles of city administration and the council itself as reflected in appendix so-and-so.
Okay.
And we can take that appendix and probably abbreviate it quite a bit
Okay.
so that it's not quite as lengthy.
Yeah, because I think what happens is, and again, I've had this conversation with a member of the council, you know, and I appreciate those conversations. They can be spirited, but the point is, there's a question about, and I think this is really the whole of a lot of this is like, what is the extent of the council's role and authority? What's the extent of the domain of the administration? What's the extent of the authority and I guess responsibility of the mayor? And you have one view is that the mayor is basically a kind of a living mascot, ceremonial, and just stays out of the way. And what I see from what you've said and kind of what I've read is that it's there's a ceremonial component to it, but there's also kind of first among equals policy.
So the mayor has all of the, is a council member with all of the powers of any other council member, in terms of being part of the debate, in terms of other kinds of things, and with the additional duty of serving as the servant to the council in presiding over the council meetings, right? To be the spokesperson for the council, to reflect the decisions of the council and so forth, as I said at the beginning. So you've got that, and then the charter indicates that there are certain other duties you have. Some of those are by state law, you know, only you can declare an emergency in the community. That's part of the state emergency management system. And you have certain other duties that only you can do. So
And-
we'll reflect those.
And essentially, I'll say this and I'll stop. The reason why, and I appreciate council and everyone for being here and going through this, because what I would like to happen is, we're not gonna be up here forever, but I would like for future councils to come in a situation where, you know, even if they have the right to change anything they wanna change, but at least there's something that is solid for them to go by, some structure. So that there's not a question about, you know, because I think what happens is sometimes you can have a mayor who's more kind of a relaxed posture, and they leave some of the policy development creation, yeah,
Rules won't ever eliminate the
yeah,
a body's dysfunction. They won't ever turn rancor into anything else. You can't do that with rules. What rules can do is give you a framework to
Yeah.
interact with one another and something create some expectations as to how meetings are going to be conducted and so
Okay.
forth. But they're not gonna change personalities.
okay. Are there any other comments from council? Like I said, I really appreciate the presentation in January. I appreciate your work this evening, and we can get the draft back to council. Is there anything else, Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to thank you
Yeah.
for coming both times. I think that, and I'm very new to council, year and a half. I served on the school board, so I was a little familiar with policies and how things go. But I think that you have definitely cleared up some things, some misconceptions. Because for a while, I was wondering if I just didn't know what my role was, you know? But having you come down here has been extremely helpful, so thank you.
Councilmember Spicer, Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to echo Councilwoman Brown's comment to you, Attorney Smith. I deeply appreciate you taking the time to come down and clarify some things for us, and my understanding of council procedures and rules have definitely deepened, and I just want to appreciate you. I think you know how I feel. I think I shared it a little bit earlier for everybody, so thank you so much.
Councilmember Reed.
I feel the same way, and I also, I talked to Councilmember French, who informed me that you were not going to be able to work with us, you were going to be working with another group. And he was wondering if you could recommend someone.
Well, I'll finish up here with this over the next couple, 3 weeks, and I'm able to do that because both the city of Wyoming and my law firm have allowed for that. I'm next Monday assume the role of in-house city attorney in the city of Wyoming. So that's an effort to reduce a 65-hour week to closer to a 40-hour week. And I now have 6 grandkids under the age of 2, so.
And more, if I remember correctly, more biking, right?
Wow.
Well, if I can, this summer's not been good for that.
Again, thank you. I think, like I said, I appreciate your insight, the balance, because I think you're not, you know, you've been straight down the middle, and I think it's been very helpful because I think in the, like you said, the political climate you described, there's a lot of times a lack of understanding about these things. And so people can jump to conclusions about who's supposed to be doing what and who's, you know, exceeded.
Some people see a conspiracy behind
Yes.
every sentence.
Yes. And I just cannot express how important and how much we appreciate that.
Thank you.
What you're doing, so. Without seeing that there's no further discussion, is there any public comment? Persons addressing the city council shall limit their comments to no more than 3 minutes, and we ask that you observe proper decorum. Is there any public comment this evening? Okay. Seeing. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor say yes?
Yes.
All opposed? Thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Hey, thank you. I know what I'm saying. Miss Reed?
You're, you owe me like.
Thank you.